The Korg Triton is as heavy as it is unsexy. Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. This is our Alamo Sound Lab channel where we talk about all things music tech related. And today we're talking about the Korg Triton, the 2000's behemoth workstation from Korg. And it's just so ugly. I honestly think this design aesthetic from like the 2000s is just so unsightly. It's so out of fashion. And the thing is so freaking heavy. This thing is one of the heaviest synthesizers that we've had in the studio. And we've had some really heavy old analog synthesizers like that Memory Moog back there and the Jupiter 8, two of the ultra heavy analog. This thing might be as heavy as they are. It's just freaking heavy. And what's interesting is its sound is also really heavy. It's very bassy, very like mid-rangey bassy. It's like a little overwhelming. And why am I doing this video? Why? Because it's officially a vintage synth. It's older than 20 years now. And I feel like it's interesting because these things are pretty cheap. I mean, you could get them for $400 or $500. And at the time, this was thousands and thousands of dollars. This was state-of-the-art technology. And this was also incredibly popular. You found it in a ton of rap and hip-hop, grime, electronica. Some of the stabs in here, you're like, oh my God, I could make a song right now. It's like you play it and you're like, wow, this is straight out of the 2000s. And what's interesting about it? So I think one of the things that's really nice, it's a straight up workstation. This is Rompler Golden Age. This is when the concept of workstation really kind of solidified and the behemoths would come out, and this was one of the most successful workstations that came out in that time, and it was cutting edge. It used HI synthesis, which is like hyper integrated synthesis, which is just a buzzword for samples with a bunch of parameters that you can modify and arrange in different ways. So what was unique about it was it had like dual polyphonic arpeggiators that you could use that were pretty cool. It had dual filters available, so you could do dual digital filters in series. And, you know, it had the Korg sound, which, you know, I'm not as familiar with, but in playing this, it's a little like darker, heavier, way more mids and bass, whereas Yamaha is definitely always the brightest in my mind when I'm listening to it. And Roland is, to me, I think I'm a Roland guy in a lot of ways. It's right in this like nice middle, this mid-range, but it has a nice bass, nice highs. It's just, this is definitely on the darker, lower range of the spectrum, and it's almost overwhelming. I'm like, wow, what would you do in a mix? This is gonna overpower everything. But, you know, this thing is built like a tank. It is a tank. It looks like a tank. It's as unsexy as you can get. But people loved it. And it's, to this day, got a huge following. And it contributed to musical history for the sheer number of songs that it was in. And as you listen to it, I think you'll hear the tonalities, the characteristics. And I still think it's interesting that these are dirt cheap. Because I think, and I do think this is like the sweet point where 2000s are not back in style. 90s are starting to, early 90s, mid 90s are starting to come back into style. Eventually, who knows, people will start paying insane, ungodly amounts for these, I think. Maybe not. But let's listen to it and we'll conclude with some final thoughts. So there you have it, the Korg Triton. There was like 15 versions of this thing. The LE, the Lite, the rack, all sorts of the studio, all sorts of different versions and expansions. This was workstation. You can maybe hear some of the disdain in my voice. This is not a particular era of synthesizers that I'm in love with, but this is it. You can get it for cheap. You get it's amazing how much stuff you get for a couple $100, but you'd have to ship it to you. And that's probably also as much as the synthesizer at this point. To ship one of these things, probably $300-400. This thing is heavy, and it'll probably break in the process unless someone really packs it well. So my opinion about it, I think it's interesting. I still think buying digital vintage synths is an interesting experience right now because, again, they're so cheap for what they have inside of them. This has a touchscreen. That's crazy to me. Early 2000s had a touchscreen, but you got so much in these things, and they have their own tone. You know, like it's interesting. Every era seems to have a tone to their instruments that isn't replicatable in software and isn't replicatable in modern kind of technology because the DACs they used and some of just the basic componentry colored it, and so they have this different color, and I think that's always interesting. And even though this is not necessarily my sound, I think that if you're fond of that era, that probably wouldn't hurt to pick up one of these cheap. It's gonna, I think these will come back into style eventually. So I think it's just an interesting piece of history. Interesting that you can get them for what you can get them for what they can do. And yeah, again, I'm just still perplexed as to how heavy this thing is. I think I might have thrown it my back point on the table for the video. But leave your comments below. Would love to hear them below. What was your experience with the Triton? How do you remember it? What impact did it have on history? I think it's an interesting topic. What are the classic sounds? I think some people have done videos on that before. But I definitely think it's an interesting purchase if you are looking for a different palette of sounds and fairly affordable one. So we'd love to hear from you. If you didn't already hit the subscribe button, come visit us at alamomusic.com. Love to see you again, and thanks for watching.